...2014 has been a very, very challenging year. It has been a year of huge humanitarian crises, all happening at once. And then on top of all that came Ebola in 3 of the world's poorest countries. And we've all had to scramble to get a proper response to that. So it's been a tough year. Ebola is much more than a devastating health crisis. It's a development crisis. People have lost their jobs. Economies have regressed because of the impact.
They need to go back to work. They have been quarantined and we are not working.
We've mobilised volunteers to be out there working at the community level on sensitising people on behaviour change. Help put school lessons on the radio because the schools were closed. We have moved to support the countries to pay the workers on the Ebola response because people who are doing the basic health work, the burials, anything associated with the outbreak, they need to be paid. They've got families to feed too and they're putting their lives on the line. We're now doing the planning for the early recovery. When this outbreak finishes, and it will finish, not now, but at some point, these countries need a lot of kickstart, jumpstart to get the economies going again. It became very clear the best part of 18, 20 months ago that the Syria crisis was not going to end anytime soon and that the burden carried by particularly the smaller countries on the borders of Syria was just impossible for them to cope with on their own. And so UNDP has been part of getting a new regional response to the crisis. Not only is the UN mobilising support for those who have fled Syria or are internally displaced in Syria, it's also looking at the development response for Lebanon and for Jordan and for other affected communities. The communities that these very large numbers of refugees are coming into are themselves often challenged for jobs and housing and water and energy and places in schools and health services. South-South cooperation is very important to UNDP and sharing good experiences and lessons that we see learned. For example, India had elections this year, the world's biggest democracy. So when it has elections, it's of global interest. And of course, India has a very professional election commission. We brought people from around 20 countries to observe these elections and see how India did it. This is very important experience sharing across the South. 2014 Human Development Report deals with vulnerability and it deals with resilience. How do we decrease the vulnerability of people at each stage of the life cycle? We are most vulnerable when we're young and when we're old and when we're sick. Societies need social protection systems that can deal with that. And then the concept of resilience. How do we support individuals? How do we support whole nations to become more resilient to shock? That shock may be a natural disaster, it may be a global recession, it may be a conflict, breakdown of the social cohesion. There are development responses that can prevent these things getting bad, and that's where we need to be very active. Big change at UNDP. Our regional service hubs, where we have a lot of the policy and program expertise and a lot of the back of house expertise, are growing as we bring down the numbers in New York. The drive behind this is to get our expertise and support closer to the country offices, which we support, because they support countries. So the critical thing for us is having our country offices really geared up, really supported to do the best job they can in developing countries. I'm very proud of UNDP for coming first in the ranking of the International Aid Transparency Initiative on openness, transparency, accountability. In the world, we've had to turn ourselves inside out from being a rather classically inward-looking, not very public UN organisation into being a world leader on transparency, and we've done it. My challenge now is how do we stay at the top? So we have to keep challenging ourselves to do better. But I really thank all in UNDP who've made this possible. 2015 is the year for international development, the biggest year since 2000 and the Millennium Declaration and then the launching of the MDGs. So we've got to get it right. We've got to see the financing package around sustainable development goals and around climate change. We've got to see disaster risk reduction mainstreamed into the sustainable development goals. We've got to see climate change adaptation and mitigation as critical to the prospects of developing countries, and particularly to the poorest and most exposed people in those countries. So 2015 matters like no other year since the turn of this century.